At the beginning of the film, a prisoner named Driver is shown pacing back and forth, looking restless in his cell. Apparently, that day was the day of Driver's freedom after 10 years in prison. Therefore, since morning, Driver has been waiting for the prison officers to come, because he can't wait to get out of the prison. Not long after, 2 prison officers arrived and immediately took Driver to the warden's room. As he walked towards the warden's office, all the other prisoners were cheering him on, not because they were happy, but because they really disliked Driver.
I can speak, but not of the evil.
Upon arrival, the warden warned Driver not to repeat his crimes after his release. Driver simply nodded his head and was released.
You have any questions?
Where's the exit?
When he got out of the prison gate, Driver immediately ran to a workshop owned by his friend. Long story short, Driver arrived at the workshop. Apparently, he kept a car there. He immediately went inside. While in the car, Driver checked his gun, which was still intact despite having been stored for 10 years. He then saw a memorable photo with his late brother. Up until this point, we have not been told who Driver really is and what his purpose is now. After that, Driver starts the car to head somewhere. "20 minutes later, Driver arrived at the place, which turned out to be an online loan office. Without saying a word, he went straight in and approached the office manager. After casually finishing off the manager, Driver left without fear. Shortly after, police and detectives began arriving to process the crime scene of the manager's death. The murder case is handled by a detective named Billy. Here, Billy is very ambitious to catch the perpetrator, because it turns out that this mission is his last mission before retiring. The scene returns to Driver, who now goes through an illegal gun dealer. He comes there to buy a weapon because he now wants revenge. However, the gun dealer did not respond and instead ordered one of his guards to chase Driver away. When the guard approached, he was suddenly frightened after seeing the tattoo on Driver's hand. He chose to leave rather than deal with Driver, who was nicknamed the Ghost of Death.
The price just went down.
Seeing his men retreat, the gun dealer finally gave in to Driver's demands. In fact, he was willing to give Driver what he asked for without being paid, as long as his life was not taken. On the other hand, Billy and his partner were seen examining the CCTV footage of the loan shark manager's death. In the footage, Driver's face is very clear. Now, Driver is officially a fugitive.
He knew his number was up.
The scene moves to a hitman named Killer, who is relaxing with his girlfriend. It is known that Killer is the top hitman in America, who never fails to carry out his work. Shortly afterwards, Killer was contacted by someone who ordered him to kill Driver. After receiving a photo and complete data about Driver, Killer immediately set out on his mission. Meanwhile, a female detective who is Billy's colleague was looking through Driver's files. She found information on why Driver was imprisoned for 10 years. In the past, Driver and his brother robbed a bank. After taking all the money, there was a chase between Driver and the police.
Go, 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 go!
2 days later, Driver's base was attacked by another group of robbers. All his friends were slaughtered, leaving only Driver and his brother. They were forced to reveal where the looted money was kept. Driver's brother, hoping to be released, finally told them the location of the money. However, instead of being released, he was immediately killed. Seeing this, Driver was furious. Unfortunately, he couldn't do anything because his hands were tied. All he could do was remember the faces of everyone involved, including the loan shark manager he had killed. Then, Driver was shot from behind until he fell down.
I'm gonna kill you all.
Not long after, Driver was seen lying in the hospital. Looking at his wounds, he should have died. However, luckily Driver was still given a miracle by God that made him regain consciousness. Unfortunately, despite surviving death, Driver still had to be imprisoned for 10 years to be responsible for the bank robbery. Back to the present. After finding out all the information about Driver, the female detective, Billy's partner, finally realized that the reason Driver killed the loan shark manager was for revenge, because he was also involved in the murder of Driver's brother 10 years ago. Back to Driver, who this time went to a grandfather's apartment. Apparently, the grandfather was also involved in the murder of Driver's brother, so now Driver will avenge him. The grandfather himself has not realized that Driver is already outside, so he was casually engrossed with a woman. After the grandfather was killed, Driver rushed away from the apartment. Just a few steps away, he was shot at by Killer, the hitman. Then there was a shootout. In the midst of the battle, Driver, who felt he had no business with Killer, chose to leave. Killer, on the other hand, was very emotional, as this was the first time his job had failed. The next day, Billy, a police detective, and his friend were processing the crime scene at the grandfather's apartment. Here, Billy's friend tells him that she believes the culprit must be Driver. This is because Billy's friend already knows about the grandfather who was involved in the murder of Driver's brother 10 years ago. Back to Driver, who now goes to a woman, his ex-girlfriend. Upon entering, the ex-girlfriend is surprised to see Driver still alive. The purpose of Driver's arrival is to invite the ex-girlfriend together, because Driver still loves her. Unfortunately, the ex-girlfriend refused because she was now married, and even had a son. She apologized for thinking Driver was dead, so she decided to open her heart to another man. Hearing this, Driver could only remain silent and left. Meanwhile, we see Billy, the detective, arguing with his wife at home. The argument is because his wife wants them to move to another city immediately, while Billy still has to complete one last mission, which is to catch Driver. The scene moves to Driver, who is now in the parking lot of a bar. Driver's arrival here is to look for his next target, who is a barkeeper. Driver remembers the incident 10 years ago, where the barkeeper was the one who executed his brother. Quickly, Driver went inside and looked for the bouncer. After a long search, Driver finally saw the barkeeper, who was about to enter the toilet. When the guard was about to wash his face, it turned out that there was already a Driver behind him. Seeing the arrival of Driver, the guard was not so surprised, because he had heard of the death of two of his friends who must have been killed by Driver. So he had guessed that Driver would come to him too. Then, the guard invited Driver to a one-on-one duel. There was a fight between the two of them.
All right, then.
It only took a few seconds for Driver to stab the guard in the stomach, knocking him down. Next, Driver decided to leave because he thought the guard would surely bleed to death. The next day, Killer the hitman was seen preparing to head to the hospital. Killer's purpose there was to hunt down Driver, because according to his client, Driver would definitely come to the hospital today to finish off the bouncer from last night. As it turned out, the bouncer who was beaten up by Driver last night was not dead and was now being rushed to the hospital. So, it was clear that Driver would come there to make sure that the barkeeper was really dead. Similarly, Billy, the detective, takes his friend to the hospital, as he believes Driver will take his revenge there. On the other hand, Driver is on his way to hunt down his next target. He is surprised to hear on the radio that the barkeeper from last night is not dead and is now in hospital. As a result, Driver immediately turned the car around and went to the hospital in question. Not long after, Driver arrived at the hospital and immediately looked for the operating room. Casually, Driver immediately finished off the barkeeper until he was completely dead. Billy, the newly arrived detective, immediately chased Driver. In the middle of the shootout, Billy ran out of bullets and was eventually pointed at by Driver. While closing his eyes, Billy could only surrender if his life was enough until here. However, when Billy opened his eyes, Driver was gone. Apparently, Driver deliberately did not finish Billy because he had no business with him. All the people Driver killed were people involved in the murder of his brother 10 years ago. Next, Driver leaves in his car. But on the way, he had to meet Killer, a hitman, and there was a chase. Here, Driver could have killed Killer. But since Killer was not involved in his brother's murder, Driver only shot his car tires. However, Killer shot back at Driver and hit him in the neck. Luckily, Driver was still safe. He immediately fled to his parents' house. In short, Driver is seen being treated by his mother for his injuries. Here, his mother asked if Driver had managed to take revenge against the people who had killed her eldest son, or Driver's brother. Driver replied, "Not yet. Now there is only one person left." Apparently, the brutal action carried out by Driver had received the blessing of his mother in order to avenge the death of her eldest son. On the other hand, Billy, a detective, has just arrived at his office. There, he gets appreciation from all his colleagues because the night before he almost managed to catch Driver. Then, Billy is given information by a female detective about the next target driver named Michael. The information was obtained because the female detective had studied who was involved in the murder case of Driver's brother. Actually, there are still two target driver, Michael, and another mysterious figure. However, from all the data studied, the detective has not managed to reveal who the mysterious person really is. Hearing this explanation, Billy thanked his friend and immediately prepared to head to Michael's place, who was the next target. At the same time, Driver was also on his way to Michael's residence. Upon arrival, it turned out that Michael had repented and was now a pastor. When he saw Driver among his congregation, Michael immediately fell silent and looked very scared. Driver then invited Michael to leave because he thought it was unethical to kill someone in a place of worship. As he walked away, Michael continued to apologize to Driver and suggested that he should repent like him. However, Driver ignored Michael's words and continued to finish him off.
That boy they killed was my brother.
In the end, Michael could only surrender while praying to God.
He sees in your soul. I can't.
Michael then said that if he was killed, he begged Driver to take care of his children and wife. Driver then pointed a gun at Michael. But he suddenly abandoned his intention to kill Michael, considering that Michael had repented and had a family to support. After that, Driver re-entered the church with the intention of repenting. But suddenly, he was pointed at from behind by Killer, a hitman. Here, Driver asks why Killer is still after him, even though all his business is done. Killer replied that there was one more person involved in his brother's murder, and that person was still alive. That person is the one who ordered Killer to finish off Driver this time. Driver asked what the person's name was, as he didn't remember it. However, Killer refused to tell, as it was the client's privacy that had to be maintained.
There must be one more. The one who hired me.
Not long after, Detective Billy arrived and ordered Killer to lower his weapon. After Killer lowered it, Billy suddenly killed a driver. It was revealed that all this time, it was Billy who hired Killer's services. He was also the mastermind behind the murder of Driver's brother. In fact, Billy was the one who first shot Driver in the head, so Driver didn't have time to see his face because Billy's position was behind him. After that, Billy still paid Killer even though Driver died by his own hand, not Killer's. On the other hand, the female detective who is Billy's colleague begins to realize that the mysterious person who has been involved in the murder of Driver's brother is Billy, her own colleague. She rushed to Michael's church because she was sure that Billy and Driver were there. Meanwhile, Billy walked casually while contacting his superiors. He reported that he was forced to kill Driver because there was resistance. As per the agreement, Billy applied for retirement because he felt he had solved the case. However, in the middle of the conversation, Billy was suddenly shot from behind. As it turned out, the culprit was Driver, who was still alive because the bullet Billy had fired earlier only hit the metal embedded in his head. Driver immediately finishes Billy off, then leaves the place.
I can't feel anything.
Moments later, the female detective and her friend arrived. They found Billy, who was already lifeless. The detective decided not to pursue Driver because, in her opinion, Driver was innocent. A few hours later, Driver was seen going to a river not far away. There, he scattered the ashes of his late brother into the river, because now all his problems were over.